The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truth about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary. Oba T, who inspired a million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE, and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the
Okay, we've had a number of problems here. How you doing, Brother Emery?
I'm doing good, Brother Tashaka. Yeah.
Well, let me just get this here. Yeah, we're going to have a nice treat today with Brother Emery Douglas, former minister of the Black Panther Party. We've had some technical difficulties here, and hopefully we've got those resolved. Brother Emery, as usual, is cool under fire. This is minor stuff for him. What he's going through, a little hiccup in a show is minor. We had the privilege of having Brother Emery on 2 weeks ago, and what he was doing there was giving us an introduction to the Black Panther Party and its launching. And so today we're going to be talking about the expansion of the Black Panther Party, its growth, and the various trials and tribulations it had to go through. Before getting into that, I just wanted to address something that's key to what we covered a week ago, and it's key to this show as well. Last week, there was a pre-recorded show entitled Twin Lineal Families, and that pre-recorded show was a show done at Wose Community Church of the African Way in Sacramento, California. And that one was dealing with the central theme of return to the African mother principle of male and female equality, the central theme, twin lineal families, and the twin lineal just society model. This was an extension of the 5-part series on the primordial trois, and it focused on how the twin lineal model was carried into the Western Hemisphere with an emphasis on carrying it into the United States. So some of this was insights not in the mother principle. This has relevance for the discussion today because we're dealing with revolutionary organization, the twin lineal family and just society model is a model for reconstructing societies from unjust to just, based on the principle of all the males and females being equally empowered to govern every phase of society. So what I'm asking people to do is to make comments on that, any questions they might have or anything else on the chat, but especially the commentary section that followed the last show, Twin Lineal Families. And if you have any questions or comments, then make those, because that one's extremely important. Prior to getting into today's show, I wanted Brother Cinnabar to present a little visual background on the Black Panther Party. And if he could get to that to show some visuals on the Black Panther Party. And while he's doing that, I want to remind people that in the last show, what we covered was the launching of the Black Panther Party. And with that launching, the various moves that both Huey and Bobby Seale made to get the party off the ground. And key point of that was dealing with the armed protests at Sacramento on the Mulford Gun Act that was really designed to stop blacks from carrying guns legally, which really carries out the intent of the Constitution, which was that white people should be able to protect themselves and not blacks. So the Panthers knew that, but they were using the legal technicalities of the law that gave you the legal right. So that befuddled them for a while. But put it up. Can you put that up? Put the film up. Okay. Okay, we're not going to be able to show the visuals we wanted to, but my tech person got cut out, and that was part of the problem. So what we want to do is get into the launching of the Black Panther Party, past that into its building, and the after effects of the demonstration in Sacramento. And I think that was a smart move that Huey had recommended that would draw press attention. And I think it probably drew more than you expected, than the party expected. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it became a huge leap forward.
Yeah.
And at the same time, but we had those who Huey and they could articulate what the party was about. So from that standpoint, they were able to repel the reactionary news coming from the press and the media and put it in context. at that time, yeah. But at the same time, we were able to begin. That was first phase of developing the party and having all these folks come in who wanted to become members and join.
Yeah. So on the one hand, people would consider this a great achievement because, boom, overnight, Black people talking about the Black Panther Party all over the country and want to join. So a lot of them want to join. So that's a big deal. But then that posed problems for the party. What were some of the problems you had with this sudden upsurge of interest in the Black Panther Party?
Well, knowing who the folks were, one, who were talking about joining, at the same time having the ability to setting up how you were going to screen those different entities that were wanting to become Panthers, and not having any chapters then except for central headquarters, and that was the first headquarters that was on Grove Street at that time, when he did the different technical training, and then had some political education classes, community classes out of that building. So it was a whole thing of beginning to, and then we were going back and forth to Sacramento. So that when we dropped that, we were able to focus more on dealing with what was needed. And I think that thrust began to open it up to, you had different organizations, schools, universities, public magazines wanting interviews with the Panthers about the history of what the Panthers were about. And so that was where it was beginning to, first way was talking about in the context of the 10-point platform and program of what we want to, the philosophical and theoretical aspects of what the party was about. And was able to put that in motion to begin to enlighten and educate folks around what the Black Panther Party's goals were and vision. Yeah.
And it really helped that you had a 10-point platform so that you could easily explain the goals and objectives of the Black Panther Party.
Yes, and yeah, and that was how the foundation of the party. That's where everything evolved around. Yes.
Now, you and the party in general described the first phase of the Black Panther Party as the Black nationalist phase of the Black Panther Party. Emory, could you define what Black Panther Party meant by the Black nationalist phase of the party, and what Black thinkers or African thinkers were influencing you at that point during this Black nationalist phase?
Well, I would say we always, in our paper, we always had Patrice Lumumba in the middle as part of the masthead of the masthead of the international news, and also the president of Ghana then, Dr. Nkrumah. Yeah, it also was also inspired. Then we had these relationships with the different liberation movements in Africa to a degree. Yeah, and just to get a lot of information back and forth was going on. Because matter of fact, going fast forward, when the Panther Party was shutting down, I can't think which one was, but that's when we gave all our printing equipment to one of the liberation movements who had representatives here in this country, and they came by and picked it up during that time. That was when they had,
that kind of reminds me of what happened with CORE. When we ended CORE, I gave the printing press to Marcus Bookstore. You know, that's when Donald Cox was operating.
Okay, yeah.
That's a good thing. Always give it to a radical group, some group that's going to, re-educate our people. You know what I mean? In a positive way. So how did also another figure in that would, of course, been Malcolm X.
Absolutely. They were inspired by Malcolm. And that was the whole perspective of the Panther in the context when Malcolm returned from Mecca. began to start his own organization thereafter. Was in the spirit of what Hugh and them used to talk about the party, and Bobby Seale in particular used to talk the party was in spirit with, inspired by. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And were there any specific ideas that Malcolm put forward that had a special influence on the Black Panther Party?
Well, I think it in the context of when he talked about he would work with anybody that wanted to deal with this racist government. Mm. And in that context, and that was in solidarity and alliances and what have you. And it was also about doing for self in the context of the programs and things that we were doing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in the context of that was self-defense as one mechanism, but not the absolute. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Meaning not the sole thing.
Yes.
Self-defense is not the sole thing. Yeah. Malcolm, in one phase in The Nation, described Black nationalism as controlling the politics, the economics, and whatnot.
Yeah.
Of the Black community. Mm-hmm. And then when he's forced out of The Nation, he's putting it in a Pan-African context. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about some overall change in the society mm-hmm. itself. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, but I also would say we were more revolutionary Black nationalists than Black nationalists. Just the word Black. We were revolutionary Black nationalists.
Yeah, we're going to get to that because
okay.
You all have two phases. One you called yourself Black nationalist, another revolutionary nationalist.
Yeah, and then intercommunalists. We defined ourselves as also as intercommunalists. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So is it true that one of the reasons that the Black Panther Party embraced Black nationalism was that, and the emphasis on armed self-defense as well as its other programs, is that Northern Blacks saw the nonviolent thrust of the Southern civil rights movement as being one that Northern Blacks tended to reject, the nonviolent thrust? And is it also true that the Black Panther Party viewed the Southern civil rights model as one that didn't address the issues facing Blacks in the urban North?
Well, when you talk about that, you have to talk about in the context of Hugh and Bobby and the visionaries. But I could say that we had a lot of respect for SNCC. So, and what they were doing, they organized the village in the South, and how SNCC was just go out there and had to fend almost for themselves in relationship to organize and with maybe a toothbrush and maybe a couple of dollars, and they had to make it work, And so I think so we had great, and then we had we had great respect for some of the leaders who came head of the NAACP, because we bought a lifetime membership at one point in the NAACP.
Yeah, Robert Williams being one of them.
Yes, yeah. Oh, yeah. Robert Williams was a great inspiration. Yeah, initially, definitely, yeah.
Talk a little about him, because some people watching the show may not know who he was.
Well, Robert Williams was the president of the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina. And the Panthers used to sell his book, Negroes with Guns, back then. He was also the one who was his life and his wife, Mabel Williams, were threatened because they began to organize, integrating the swimming pools and all those basic things and resistance, and starting a gun club using what's that, National Rifle Association, to start a gun club. And so his life was threatened, and he had to leave the country. And he went to, I remember he went to, I think he went to Cuba, and then he may have went to Tanzania, then to China. And we used to see him on the front of the Peking Review, sitting with Mao quite a bit. And so that was showing a more solidarity, third world kind of solidarity in that context. And so how that vision, they also inspired us in relationship to our solidarity with what was in the Chinese Revolution and access when Huey and them had access to the Red Book and was selling it for technical equipment and also as a universal book or guide in relationship to readings and learning and what have you, as in the beginning. Yeah. But Robert Williams was he was a great inspiration. I mean, I learned about him through going around with Hank Jones and all that, because they were a part of RAM at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember then they were trying to, along with others who were trying to, going to make him the honorary or the president of RAM.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And he had a publication called The Crusader.
Yes, he had a Crusader called. He had a radio show, Free Dixie. I think it was. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and given ideas on how the movement should go for Black liberation in the United States. Now, in reading in Huey's book, Revolutionary Suicide, he made note of the fact that he noted that when King went to Watts, when the Watts Rebellion first kicked off, his comment was, the Black people in Watts were rejecting the nonviolence coming from King. Do you recall that?
A little bit, I do. Yes. Yes. And I think because you had been spoon-fed, or you seen it on the news all the time, being bombarded, and being in the North, you think you got these freedoms unless you don't have, but you're frustrated about what you see, and you're ready to go to war. That's an emotion. You're dealing with the emotional aspect of things as well, just in general. And so I think that from that context, you had a segment of a large segment of the community, young people in particular, in many ways, who didn't want to turn the other cheek. Didn't look at it in that context.
Yeah, and King was becoming aware. I don't know if King ever really reached the final conclusion that while his methods had some effect in the South, and it produced civil rights and voting rights legislation in the North, it wasn't working, because he noted, and in previous shows we've covered King, and he noted that after 65, he didn't have any victories, because that's when he moves to Chicago. He didn't live for the Poor People's Campaign. He was addressing the thing in Memphis when he was assassinated, but the methods he was taking from the South and bringing to the North just wasn't proving viable. And he was admitting that he didn't know how to build power. He had been effective, and that movement had in the South in introducing change. So I think that groups coming up after that would have some good reason to think they're going to have to try some new methods. Some methods. King himself was searching for them and hadn't found. But here's a key point that I don't know if the party was aware of, because by 65, King had begun to embrace a revolutionary approach. We've done a couple of shows on this where Menu Ampin, who wrote a master's thesis on King, and basically shows that from 65 on, King embraced a revolutionary posture, basically around restructuring the country, and saw that the civil rights phase, as the system called it, was over, because he said civil rights was cheap. Right to vote, desegregation doesn't cost anything. He said this phase of restructuring would cost, because it's got to deal with economics, it's got to deal with housing, it's got to deal with healthcare, and it's got to deal with the redistribution of wealth. And he was calling for a restructuring of the country, economically and value-wise. Was the party aware of King's shift in these areas?
I think in many ways, yes, I believe so. Because Bobby was one who could put up, and he would quote full pages from Dr. King. We had that kind of admiration
Mhm.
And at the same time, you do the same thing with Malcolm and tell you what pages it was that he was, and that was also practices oratorial skills as well, oratorial skills at the same time. And I do recall, I think it was in '68, just before a couple of weeks before he was assassinated, murdered by the state in Memphis, Tennessee. He had called and Bobby had talked to him because he was starting this new movement organization again, bring it up, and he wanted the Panthers to be a part of that. Yeah, I do recall that. Yeah,
Okay.
but Bobby had agreed to it, but then he got murdered, assassinated. Yeah,
That was probably his campaign to end poverty in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, poor people's campaign.
Yeah,
Like
it would make sense that he would contact the party.
Mm-hmm.
As we pointed out before, he didn't have any problem having the Deacons for Self-Defense as a part of the armed group when Black Power was launched, during the Meredith March in Mississippi. He didn't have a problem with that. So he was a little bit more complicated than people have portrayed him to be. And he surely wasn't taken out because he had compromised with the system.
No. When he called the United States the greatest purveyor of violence on earth, on the planet, then he they couldn't deal with that. Pointing it out. Yeah.
Yeah, because he identified with the poor. You were organizing the poor, poor blacks and poor everybody.
Yeah.
In the first part of the series, I asked you, had the Black Panther Party analyzed the San Francisco freedom movement? Because in the context of the Black freedom movement, because we span two movements, the Black freedom movement, Black power movement, we led the Black nationalist wing within the Congress of Racial Equality. We're a case where the Black freedom movement's being effectively applied to the North. I don't think King had a chance to really look at that. I mentioned in a previous show, I met with King when he was out here in San Francisco in 1964 to raise money with the Baptist Ministers Union and tried to elicit his support on the Bank of America campaign. But I don't think they had really assessed this movement. But I had asked you, had the Black Panther Party analyzed the San Francisco Black Freedom Movement, because it was a successful adaptation of this freedom movement and Black Power movement to the North, the only one that was victorious. And so this was a movement that was a 6-year movement. It's the mother movement preceding all others in California. It was successful. It was the only successful Black freedom, Black Power movement in the North in defeating an economic power structure and building a mass base among Black people. So it had produced a lot of jobs for Black people, people of color, housing for Blacks. We built housing, block by block community organizing, 45,000 Black people. You all called it the 10-10 system. Did that for a couple of years. And we had alliances and coalitions with Black churches that represented over 45,000 Black folks, used them in boycotts. We had alliances and coalitions with Black social clubs, civil rights groups, particularly NAACP, which was one of the 4 militant ones in the country, along with Robert Williams, headed by Dr. Nathaniel Burbridge. And we radicalized the white students, many of whom in supporting you, which also Nick had radicalized when he came to SDS, but we radicalized the UC Berkeley students. And their participation in the San Francisco Freedom Movement gave birth to the free speech movement, according to them, and influenced, basically gave rise to the experimental college that's a forerunner of Black studies. And then aligned with, as you all did later on a national level, with Asians, Latinos, and while the Black Panther Party did their first planning out of a War on Poverty program office, we took over the War on Poverty program in San Francisco and funneled millions of dollars in the Black community for community organizing. And it was that project that radicalized Ron Dellums, who became an advisor for you all.
Yeah.
That was kind of funny. So my question is, Why do you think the party didn't? If the party didn't look at this, why do you think they didn't? You think they could have benefited from some of the lessons we learned in that movement? It was a 6-year movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, being a youth movement and, young people coming in, the urgency, feeling that there was urgency at the time and was focusing on that in the moving forward in that context. But at the same time, I'm quite sure those were some of the things that Huey and Bobby thought about, because we had those advisory committees with Ron Dellums being on it and others, and they were talking about some of the things that had been instituted and put into place by CORE and other civil rights organizations. So I'm quite sure that some of these all that played into how to move forward and implement different aspects and phases of the organization's programs as it went forward. Yeah, I'm quite sure of that. I can't say specifically. That would be something that maybe have to do some more research on Huey and what they said or interviews that they've done. Yeah, but they were always in talking with those who was in these organizations in the Bay Area, for sure, definitely.
Yeah, our exchange was, because I was no longer in CORE, but as the party formed, was with Eldridge, not with Huey, and very little with Bobby. And that's mainly because Eldridge had a contact with Beverly Axelrod, who had been attorney CORE prior to that. And so she familiarized him with us, and that was the basis for that. Now, when Huey and this cop officer Fry tangled, and Huey ended up wounded and Fry ended up dead. Might have told you, don't tangle with Huey. Not saying that he killed him. I'm not going into that, but I'm saying Huey came out alive. He was wounded, but not dead. So the party enters the Free Huey period, and a period where the party now begins to define itself as a revolutionary Black nationalist organization. I remember attending a meeting of Blacks chaired by Eldridge Cleaver at Esther's Orbit Room, where strategies for freeing Huey were discussed. Did you attend this gathering?
Yeah, I think I was there. I was at the meeting. I think matter of fact, I had the posters and stuff that I was making in the Black Arts movement at that time. Had made and had printed prior to Huey being in the Free Huey movement. Some of those were used to raise money for bail during that time. Yes.
Do you remember any of the strategies that were being proposed? Because Eldridge,
it was talking about again, I guess as broad as possible in the context of where by any means necessary in the context of getting people involved to be a part of the Free Huey movement itself. Yeah. So, but that's basically what I remember. I'm still the new youngster on the block in the context of in everything that's going on, and I'm observing and listening, knowing what it is, in that context, but not the depths of then, as we develop and evolve. Yeah.
As I recall, Eldridge was proposing a broad campaign that would bring in various white groups, Black groups, whatnot. My input was that it was very important to organize Black youth, Black church, the larger Black community into a Free Huey movement. And then after that meeting was over. So for the Black Panther Party leadership, what did they mean by revolutionary Black nationalism as opposed to Black nationalism? What was the difference between them?
Well, it is in the context of the revolution. Revolution is about change. about process, and Huey and them had to envision in the context of it's revolutionary serving the interests of the community in the context of the desires and uplifting the community quality of life issues. That was the 10-point platform and program, what we wanted and what we believed. And implementing those programs was a revolutionary act. And so in that context, he's talking about being the Black National Revolutionary Organization. That's been the primary factor, you know. Yeah.
Now, at this point, the Black Panther Party, to build a broad-based movement to free Huey, because Huey is now in jail and there's a major movement to free him. The Black Panther Party forms coalitions with white groups, including the Peace and Freedom Party, later Students for Democratic Society, and other white leftist groups and white groups. Why did the Panthers form these coalitions, and what did the Panthers achieve from these coalitions?
Well, they had platforms in those middle class blacks and other communities that could use that platform to talk about and put the context of the Black Panther Party in this context and correct perspective. In the context of using that and they have national platform, stage to run on the Peace and Freedom Party. So that means you could travel around the country and talk about the issues that we were reflected with and those kinds of things. So it was in that context, it was solidarity and agreement in that context. Yes. So it was about, and they had resources to offer, you know, and that growing and developing that was relevant and needed at the same time. But we were still the ones who were defining for ourselves how we want to move and what have you. Yeah.
You were pointing out that one of the advantages the party got is they were able to push the Black Panther Party by running for office. What were some of the offices that party people ran?
At first, to use as a tool, we ran. Elder Cleveland was able to get agreement with them for the Peace and Freedom, so he ran for the president. But we had Huey because he was on the ticket as a congressperson in the 7th congressional district. And Kathleen Cleaver ran for congressperson in San Francisco in the congressional district. So that gave all of the perspective to talk about the free Huey in the context of the party and what it was about. But also the 7th congressional district, Ron Dellum being our ally and a good friend of Huey's at that time, seeing how broad a scope and liberal progressive that district was, which covered Oakland and over in parts of over into look like Berkeley, over and the Claremont area district where it all cuts up and you're still in Oakland, but you're thinking in Berkeley. And so holding rallies and talks over there and fundraising, those kinds of things. He's seen how progressive that district and broad it was. Then he ran for Congress and he became the congressman after that for over 20 years in that district. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's the same district now that Barbara Lee ran after him.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. And both Ron Dellums and Barbara Lee became two of the most principled people that have served in Congress.
Yes.
And Ron was interesting because he was an ex-Marine. Mm-hmm. I was in the Marine Reserves. He was in the Marine Regulars. We both went to San Francisco State. Mm-hmm. His uncle was a leader in the ILWU, International Longshoremen and Warehousemen Union. My father worked in the ILWU. So Ron and I, we knew each other. But what was key about him is his integrity. Ron stood on some principles.
Yeah.
And a strong anti-war platform.
Yeah.
And I recall meeting with him just before he was going to assume the position of chair of the
Mhm.
Armed Services Committee.
Mhm.
And here's the anti-war activist in charge of the military budget.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think he was wondering, was he going to last? And then there was a point in
Mhm.
1974. I just come back from the Sixth Pan African Congress. I have a picture of him and I hugging out of San Francisco State. And he was telling me at that point that the Zionists were going to vote him out of office
Mhm.
because he had opposed the oppression of the Palestinians.
Mhm.
So the Zionists were coming after him. But what he found out was that he had become a major cause and a major symbol, and they couldn't get him.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then Barbara Lee, obviously,
Yeah.
only person to stand up against
Yeah.
intervention in Afghanistan.
Oh, yeah. And we worked with her all when she was in Mills College.
Mm.
Way back then, all the way up, and she came to one of the reunions and acknowledged that she was a community worker with the Panthers, and
Mm.
talked highly of what was being done community wise or whatever. Yeah.
And both of them were social workers,
Mm-hmm.
which I also commend people for, because that's a more of a giving and caring profession. You ain't going to get rich.
Mm-hmm.
And Maxine Waters is a social worker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think you do much better with people who are dealing with poverty,
Yeah.
rather than lawyers when it
Yeah.
comes to representing you.
Yeah. And the LA chapter had a real close relationship with Maxine Waters.
Yeah, she's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Willie Brown trained her. She has her whole thing is reward your friends and punish your enemies. And she doesn't just mean white. She's referring to any blacks that turn their backs on you, they're going to punish you too. She learned that from Willie Brown. I told Willie that we were at a memorial for Nathan Hare's wife, Julia Hare. And I went up to him and told him, I says, hey, you know what Maxine said about you? He said, what? Willie, for people that don't know, Willie Brown was Speaker of the Assembly in California, the second highest office in California, and then mayor in San Francisco. He was a free lawyer for us. And I said, Maxine said she learned from Willie that if you don't support our position, you will get punished. And she said, Willie would put them in the worst offices. Willie said, he grinned and said, she said that like he didn't know. Now, it's an interesting piece here on the relationship of the Black Panther Party to SNCC people. And this is extending your comment of the party's respect for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There was a meeting at the Fillmore Auditorium, which for people who are outside the Bay Area, that was a major entertainment venue for Blacks in the San Francisco Bay Area. James Brown and others performed there. We mentioned this before. And at this particular event, Ike and Tina Turner were there. I assume they were performing. Eldridge Cleaver announces the drafting of Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture, H. Rap Brown, and James Foreman into the Black Panther Party leadership. Do you remember the positions that they drafted them to hold?
Yeah, I think Stokely was the Prime Minister of North America. Mm-hmm. I think H. Rap Brown might have been Field Marshal. I'm not sure.
Minister. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. And I can't think of what James Foreman's position was. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I recall the meetings because when we used to work on the paper out of Eldridge's studio, when he moved to another location in San Francisco. And during the time when Stokely and them was coming north and they were doing a lot of speaking and what have you, and engaging with the party, James Foreman came by, Stokely came by during that time, and at different periods at the same time. But when Stokely came, they were talking to Stokely at that time, and he was trying to decide that if he would do it or not, because I think he would organize his own movement going north. And I think at that time he was kind of reluctant, but then he went like the same thing that happened with like Bunchy Carter when they took him over to talk to Huey. After he talked to Huey, he agreed to accept the title in leadership. Yeah,
Yeah,
because they were given the green light just to organize. It wasn't like they had to come in and, as long as they understood the context of what the party was about, they were given the green light. Yeah.
uh-huh. One of the comments that then Stokely, later Kwame Ture, said when he had come to the Bay Area for another reason earlier than that and met with different leaders, he met with Huey.
Mm-hmm.
And a positive comment he made was that Huey listened.
Mm-hmm.
He said, that really impressed him.
Mm-hmm.
Because you ain't going nowhere if you don't listen. You know what I mean? So that was a major
mm-hmm.
that was a major comment there. So I that was clever because these are major figures in the Black freedom movement.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the emerging Black Panther Party. And then they're acting like a government because what they're doing is drafting in major organizers into the Black Panther Party. Now that's an interesting move because that kind of move sends a signal to a lot of people, including a lot of Black people.
Yeah, and not only that, that's when you had then you had that solidarity coming, and then you had across beyond just the Black Panther Party, but Black Panther Party in a way being highlighting it at that time with those moves. That was in 1968 is when they began, J. Edgar Hoover began to talk about dismantling and destroying any Black nationalist unity.
Yeah, now that one we're going to get into in a minute because
okay.
But yeah, that's important. But I thought that whole approach was brilliant because you're acting like a government.
Yes, yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, if you're talking about you revolutionary Black nationalists, well, one of the definitions Black nationalism is you're a nation. In this case, a nation within a nation, behaving like a nation. And these are some pretty good people that you're drafting into the organization.
And there were others who came along too from SNCC who came along and wanted to join in as well. Yeah,
you remember some of them?
I think Weatherspoon was one, and there was a few others. There was quite a few others because I used to communicate with them. I can't think of names right now. But with Stokely came Cleveland Sellers and Willie Ricks and all that collective came together. At one. Then there was others.
Now later, not much later, because after Huey's in prison, you've got a Free Huey movement going on. So a massive rally, a Free Huey rally was held in Oakland. And you attended, I attended. You could talk about your attendance in a minute. And so SNCC leaders also took part in that, including Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown, and James Foreman. And what was interesting is when H. Rap Brown came, he was on the stage. He was technically under orders not to leave New York because he was facing prosecution. And so with his bold bad self, he said he was there to consult with his attorneys. Yeah, you mean your attorneys that are in New York are now in San Francisco? You know what I mean? Also at this rally, Eldridge Cleaver, Bobby Seale, and others spoke. To you, what was the significance of this rally?
Well, the significance of the rally was showing unity and bringing people together, all those different, amazing leaders in the civil rights and human rights movement. So that was the impact of it, because you were seeing them on. Then you seen how everything was live on TV, what was going on in the context of what SNCC, was doing and what have you. So people knew them all over the country and all over the world, and so that solidified another phase in the context of the growth and the development and the solidarity of the Black Panther Party, achieving by Stokely, Rap, and SNCC coming together in many ways. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it showed just broad support in the context of enlightening, educating people in support of the Free Huey movement. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which the Free Huey movement was talk about Huey and his freedom, but it also gave the opportunity to talk about the quality of life issues in the context of the community itself, Black community itself.
One of my memories is sitting there that I said to myself, and I think a lot of other people said, this period, this rally was a part of a process that had established the Black Panther Party at this point as the leading force, Black organizational force for social change in the U.S. at that point. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You didn't have 1 million members, but you had a fair number, mm-hmm. and around the country. But it was particularly the stands you were taking on the police, the stands you were taking generally on empowering Black people, mm-hmm. And then later your stand, both, your programs and your anti-war stand. But at this point, it was pretty clear that the Black Panther Party was being viewed as the vanguard organization. Would you agree, mm-hmm. with that?
Yeah. In that context, in relationship to how we begin to organize, and because people, we lead by example. And that's what vanguard organizations lead by example. Mm-hmm.
As a side note, most of us then would buy into the concept of vanguard. Mm-hmm. Now, I think we're mature enough to know that's not a good position to hold. Then it was okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, because that was the way things were, and that's how the party was viewed, and they deserved to be. But in the context of history, we now know that you might have a vanguard communist party in China, okay? Well, what does that mean? Well, at that time, maybe 700 million Chinese. Mm-hmm. And what it means is that at different stages of the struggle, they were moving to gain more power and eventually overpowered their opposition, the gangsters, the Kuomintang and Chiang Kai-shek and all of that. And so that meant you were the vanguard. But when you're in a situation where no single organization or movement is going to be able to take the state out, that's not a good position to be in. Yeah. But at that time, we all saw that as appropriate. I think Malcolm X, he assumed that they'd have been saying that to him, and he would have thought it was all right.
And there's more to defiance of the system in this as well.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. But at this point, that's one of the things that this represented, and it was significant. Now, one of the things about not just the Free Huey rally, but the whole move to incorporate SNCC people into the Black Panther Party is that you all were forming a coalition with SNCC. Mm-hmm. One of the groups you're forming coalitions with, or at least leading members of SNCC. Mm-hmm. Better way to put it. So how do you see that having played out? How did that end up working out?
Well, it worked out for a while. There's always, like Hugh said, contradictions. You have the unity of ideas and unity, but contradictions. You have agree and disagree, and those were things that were communicated between SNCC members and maybe Huey and other leadership at that time. If there were differences and those kinds of things that went on, so it was relative in that time. But of course, there were those differences in vision and what the process is going on. When Huey was still basically grounded, and the Panthers were still grounded in the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party and implementing the programs. But at the same time, I think there was there might have been some differences in the perspective of how you vision it, how you defined it, how you want to go about it, in that process as well.
One of those differences was expressed by Stokely at the rally in Oakland, where he and other SNCC people and Panthers spoke, the Free Huey rally, and he was critical of the alliances and coalitions that the party was making with the Peace and Freedom Party and others, as were a number of other groups, including myself. So how did the party view that?
Well, the party always communicate. That was the policy in the context of showing solidarity and by any means necessary. We talked about that in the context of Malcolm and getting Huey out of prison and the whole bit. And that was another tool in the context of solidarity and broadening and having the platforms abroad in the belly of the beast. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was always, and they would always articulate that position, and to Stokely, others who, disagreed or had some opposing perspective. But this was the policies and guidelines of the Black Panther Party in the context of what it was trying to achieve, the goal it was trying to achieve.
Yeah, because we discussed this when in preparing for this. SNCC and CORE had both, by the time it had reached the Black nationalist phase and the Black power phase, had concluded that whites could work best in the white community, and that Blacks could organize Blacks. So part of the criticism was to the extent that some of these allies were coming back into the Black community as opposed to just organizing in the white community.
Well, they weren't, who work with us, if we had action, like a campaign or something, and they want to do some campaign work in a precinct and those kinds of things, but actually on a day-to-day basis, it was Black Panther Party membership that was working in the Black community. We're trying to get them to reach out to white people in the community and enlighten them and educate them, even if they want to sell papers, the same thing. And because I remember there was some discussions at one time about them working, going out in the community, and some of them just said straightforward, they were scared because they kill them. Their own folks to kill them. So they knew how treacherous the situation was, because someone had broke away from the right-wing family members that they may have had,
right.
Those kinds of things. So it was, they had that going on as well. Yeah, but it was like, if they wanted to sell papers, if they wanted to do some work, that was fine. But we were going to define who we were and how we were going to do it.
Mm-hmm. One of the points you made with me, and this is generally not known because there's a general assumption among people who don't know the history of the Black Panther Party that the Black Panther Party didn't relate to the Black middle class and this kind of stuff. And one of the things that you were making as a very important point was that both Bobby and Huey, and then later other party leaders, made efforts to reach out to Blacks from different backgrounds, social, economic backgrounds, including Blacks from the Black middle class. And you particularly talked about some of the interactions that you had with Blacks from that sector and what they did. What was some relationship?
Well, the first one, Ruth Bedford, who was, I think I mentioned, who was a dancer with Dorothy Dunham. And she had a partner, brother named Cyril, who she used to hang around with. And Huey used to bring them over to see what we were doing, and they're cutting up and talking. And out of that, she said, well, those discussions are talking about setting up programs. And they were talking about a breakfast program. She said, well, you can have one out of my minister's church. And that was on 7th and West, 27th and West in West Oakland, where we had set up one of the first breakfast programs, Yeah. And Lionel Wilson, talking, they were, before he even became, when he was a lawyer, before he was the mayor, he used to communicate with Lionel Wilson and Ron Dellums Reverend Pinkett, who was called as Bishop Pinkett. Now, if he's still living, he was a couple of years ago. And so they always had these connections and talking about, even when we would set up to go out to procure the food for the breakfast program. On the first letterhead that we had a list of all these middle-class blacks who supported the Panthers that were known in Oakland, who would, as showing that we had this community entrenched support, Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes sense because Huey himself, 12th grade, couldn't read and teaches himself how to read. And he's in the Afro-American Association. And the Afro-American Association is middle-class blacks. Yeah. Donald Warden, a lawyer, coming out of Bolt Hall. Ron Dellums, Judge Ramsey. You can tell the story in a minute on Ramsey.
Yeah. Well, when we got involved and we ran the Bobby Seale for mayor and Elaine Brown for congresswoman, but also when we ran Fidelity for Lionel Wilson becoming the first black mayor of Oakland, he acknowledged that. And that if it wouldn't been for the Panthers, he would have never been elected. He always mentioned that. And so what happened is that the Northern California, or the California head of the Democratic Party, came to our office with a list of possible black judges. And they were asking, I think it was David Healy, for others, and I'm right there, who would they think would these be good black choices? And Judge Sweeney's name was on there. And who you just mentioned, what's his name? He was Ramsey was on there. And we said, yeah, all those would be good, because we didn't think they were going to do anything favors for us, but we thought they were good choices as judges, Yeah. And sure enough, Sweeney, when you had Assistant Mayor Majida Rahman, her name, who after the Panthers started a Healthy Babies program, where women who were going to prison, they would send them to that program. And all the women that used to come in front of him as the last chance, instead of sending them to prison, he would send them to the Healthy Babies program because he knew that she was a Panther, had been Panther, was a Panther.
Yeah, this is the complexity of organizing that's usually missed because people do the stereotyping, and so somebody's radical and they're doing this, and somebody over here is doing that.
Yeah.
But actually, a lot of stuff is going on beneath that people can't see, and that's very important. I mean, extremely important.
Yeah.
Going back to Huey was moving in and out of these groups. So was Bobby Seale, that you could call bougie, and had some information on history and culture, and he was digging into that. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And that was a part of what helped shape him.
And not only that, we bought our first typesetting equipment from Dr. Goodlett in the Sun Reporter when they were upgrading.
Okay. For people that don't know, Dr. Goodlett, we mentioned him before. He was the owner of the Sun Reporter newspaper, had a PhD in psychology from UC Berkeley and a medical degree from Meharry, served on the board of Meharry, was a multimillionaire, and was a socialist. He was a socialist capitalist. And he was a radical. I had a lot of respect for that man. So that's interesting. And you did a lot of work for the Sun Reporter newspaper.
Oh yeah. Well, they wanted me to come over to work for them after the Black Panther Party, and I did go over there and work. I stayed there for about 4 or 5 years. No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking another place. I worked there for almost up until 2004. From about 1986, around there. 85, 86 until 2000.
After your sojourn in the Black Panther Party.
The
Black community is providing its support as you provided support for them. And Goodlett identified with these movements. So this is also another complexity of our struggle, because if you're not dealing with these different levels, you're going to get yourself in a bind.
And that was the reason why when in Seattle chapter, when they started these attacks, what they did, like they did the attack the office in L.A. and the shootouts and what have you, they had went to Seattle and the feds, and they had talked to the mayor and others about the raid and supporting the raid, and they refused to support it. That's why it didn't happen in Seattle. Because the pastors in Seattle had entrenched themselves in so many ways in the community, and that they couldn't do it because they wouldn't sign off on it. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, in our case, the San Francisco Freedom Movement, we didn't fight for black cops. We didn't fight for black firemen, but the spillover of the movement was they hired them. Black cops would come to us, to me, and tell me when the police had infiltrated us. My slave name, he'd say, Bill, you're infiltrated. They wouldn't tell us who. I wouldn't tell anybody in the group. Then we'd set them up. And then I received a letter from, I've mentioned this in a previous show. He lives in Atlanta. I'm not going to name his name. Trying to hook up with me, not knowing that all along we knew he was working for the San Francisco Police Department. So those ties didn't hurt. You know? You want to say something else?
No, that's true. Yeah. I mean, one of the things we used to talk about that in the context of needing more black people, police in the community who lived in the community. Therefore, people would know who they were, and that would keep them in line. That was the thinking at that time,
right?
You know, because if they know that they got eyes watching them, and they're your neighbors and what have you, then it's more likely you're going to be able to have more control over that. That's it, than you otherwise.
I want to welcome Julian Carroll, Imhotep Akabulan, Cynthia Cornelius, LaShonda Henderson, who's a regular. Brother Ugawa just clicked out. And Sister Susan Tata, Pan-African DTV, which is a powerful Pan-African TV program coming out of Germany. She's a continental African from the Cameroons. Bad sister. In our culture, we mean good. Don't misinterpret that. So we're glad that you're watching, sister. I've been on your show before and hope to be on in the future. And people should watch Pan-African DTV. In fact, the analytics show on this show shows that a lot of our viewers watch, and more of you should watch it.
But can I also say, even though we talked about that in the context of police leaving our community, we still looked at it from a standpoint of institutional structure, racism and murders that were going on.
Right.
And so we was holding the system accountable, irregardless,
And getting these middle class blacks and others to relate to that and doing something about that, as opposed to being oatmeal people serving the system. Or if they are oatmeal people, do something for us too. One of the skilled people that you recruited into the party was DC Donald Cox, who had been publicity chairman for CORE and the Congress of Racial Equality, and recently passed. He was living in France in exile. He had come back. They had put him in prison forever. So he was an example of one of the blacks with skills that you brought into the party. And you were telling me you lived with him for a while. What was your view of DC in terms of his role in the party, what he brought to the party?
Well, DC was given a field marshal position, travel around the country and organize. He spent a lot of time in New York, and from time to time I go to New York, where he stayed, whatever collective he was staying in. I usually would stay there. I remember on several times, every time I go there, always something would happen with the police. They would want to do something, and he, and those kinds of things. Yeah. But DC was, middle class black. I remember I used to living in Fillmore. I used to see him. I didn't know who he was. He used to drive his red car with the top top down.
Oh, was that a sports car?
Yeah, sports car and all that. Yeah. And then, when we was doing the rallies, street rallies, and we're trying to recruit people with skills to come into the party. And we had these forums, and Bobby Seale was doing a rally in San Francisco, a public rally in the street, and said that Emory have these forms over here for all of you who want to donate your skills. You can fill out the form with what you can offer. And he was one that came on and say, hey, he worked at a printing place and that he could help us out. And he still there saying, let me know. It was almost a couple of weeks later when we didn't have access to get to production aspect of putting the photographs for the paper, getting the camera ready for the paper. And so I was able to call DC, and he took me downtown. I think it was on Sampson or somewhere down in that area, off of Market. And we went downtown and we went upstairs where he was running the business, and we went up to about midnight because it was closed. And he developed all the photos and films that we needed to put in the paper, and did that for about 2 or 3 weeks until we were able to get things straight. And it was day after that he said he wanted to meet Huey, and I took him over, called him and set it up, and went by Huey's to meet Huey. And then day after, that's when he joined. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was early 1967. That was about mid 1967, around there. Yeah, because it had to be after the first, about the third, fourth paper, somewhere around there. Yeah, so it had to be in the summer somewhere.
I understand as field marshal, he was kind of a troubleshooter, being sent around.
Yeah, and organizing. Yeah, technically, otherwise, all phases, political education classes, making sure what chapters, checking out what they're doing, and reporting back if there's any problems or things going on that they observe or think are going on. Not necessarily going in to run the chapter, but talking with those who were coordinating to get a sense of what things were going on. And they're observing it and giving their suggestions on how they can improve or talk, those kinds of things. Yeah.
Donald Cox was a friend of John Handy. John Handy, a lot of you may not know watching the show, is a great jazz musician. He was a member of San Francisco Corps, and he was in charge of our Freedom Band. Mm-hmm. He sold 1 million records on his song Hard Work, and is the most the jazz musician that performed the most at the Monterey Jazz Festival, over 11 times, a composer and everything else. Mm-hmm. He was a friend of Donald Cox and showed Donald Cox how to get him a house, which is a Victoria, right around the corner from where this musician lived. And then they had other interactions. And Donald Cox was a very humble brother, but he was also a brother who was training young recruits into the Black Panther Party and how to use weapons. Mm-hmm. Remember that part?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's what Field Marshal had the responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He called me up to sell me weapons on the phone. I'd hang the phone up. I said, brother, I talked to him. I said, my phone's tapped. And even though these weapons you're selling are illegal, I ain't talking about this over the phone, and then I'd buy the weapon. That was Donald Cox. And he was a good listener. He was also a good listener. And he had good writing skills. Yes. Your grammar had to be just right. He'd get on you.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's why when he used to came to the point where I take the paper to him after it was laid out to proof it. When we had other editors beyond elders who were doing editing or writing on the papers, once it was finished, I would take it to him to double check everything that had been proofed before it was taken over for the printer. Yeah.
Uh-huh. And he was a photographer. He learned his photography skills from his uncle. Mm-hmm. So that place you would go to, that was his uncle's studio. Mm-hmm. So yeah, quite a guy. And our newsletter in Core was put out by his committee. It was a professionally printed newsletter. It wasn't one of these mimeograph machines. Mm-hmm. professional stuff. In discussing the growth of the Black Panther Party, I wanted to talk about Huey and Bobby Seale, and particularly Bobby's influence on Huey, because we focused on Huey, but Bobby played a very important part, Bobby Seale, in the Black Panther Party. He had been an active member of RAM, Revolutionary Action Movement, and in that had been exposed to a number of readings. And Huey was reading Afro-American Association and whatnot, but Bobby is introducing Huey to some other stuff. And one of the things he introduced him to was Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. And of course, we know that in the 60s, Frantz Fanon was a guru in the Black Liberation Movement. Malcolm X and Frantz Fanon, Malcolm more so, and then Frantz Fanon, in Frantz Fanon's book, Wretched of the Earth, there's an emphasis placed by Fanon on the lumpen proletariat, which he defined as rural Africans who had moved into the cities and lived in wretched conditions and in poverty and whatnot. Some of them engaging in criminal enterprises and others just simply poor. And it was Frantz Fanon's conclusion that the lumpen proletariat would lead the independence movements in Africa. So this is an idea that Huey is exposed to. Bobby talks about how he had read the book, but then Huey provided to him more clarification when he interpreted the meaning of that. So, Emory, how did Huey respond to Fanon's idea that the role of the lumpen was a leading role in the African liberation movement? And how did Huey define the lumpen?
Well, in the context of it was defined in the context of, and how it played out was in their organizing and in the hood, on the streets, with those sisters and brothers who just called the dregs of society in many ways, in sense, but that was in the context of the racism by the state institutions defining it, whereas the party and Huey and Bobby's definition was brothers and sisters who had been pushed out the system, now gave up, don't care no more about it. They ain't looking for no job, don't want no job. And whatever it comes, they survive illegitimate capitalists in many senses. And so them being on the forefront of the abuse and the brutality, because here we are organizing around point number 7 and doing patrols, they understood that those sisters and brothers who were observing, in many cases, were being brutalized, just called anything except the sons of God and daughters of God or what have you, were just beaten down and bruised. They understood that. And so they were the first ones to join. Those were the lumpens out there in the streets, while maybe been in all kinds of illegitimate stuff, but they were willing to join. And out of that, you have to begin to come into the party with all the baggage. So then you have to deal with those issues, but they were the first ones to come into the party. That not to say that there weren't other people beyond the lumpen that came to the party, but that was the majority in the beginning. That was the foundation.
That's key right there. And at a point in which the previous movements, while they're often characterized as just being middle class, I remember a debate that Malcolm X had with James Farmer, who was executive director of the Congress of Racial Equality. So Malcolm was portraying CORE as basically middle class and house Negroes. And of course, the Nation of Islam was the field Negroes. And Farmer had to correct him and point out that CORE, this was true of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was made up of working class blacks. It was made up of middle class blacks, and it was made up of street blacks. What you're talking about, the lumpen, though the lumpen were definitely a minority within CORE.
Yes.
So the portrayal of the Black freedom or so-called civil rights movement as just a middle class movement was incorrect. But the fact is, what the Panthers was able to do, along with the Nation of Islam, was to bring in people who are on the bottom. People, in the case of the Nation, in prison, recruiting them in prison, and then drawing them into the Nation outside of prison. And in case of the party, people may come out of prison or people on the streets, but people, as you point out, which I think is a good working definition, the start of which weren't working a regular job. Your income was illegal. That is the definition of a lumpen, for sure. But the key point is, and Huey made this point in his analysis, one of the points he made was that automation was taking over and more people were being put into the ranks of the unemployed. And then he was even talking about that he saw more and more workers would become lumpen. And he wasn't just talking about black workers. And that, in fact, has happened. And that's part of the reason for the rise of Trump, is that some of those who have been, we're talking white, who have been marginalized, false populism is telling them that Trump's going to go out and fight the system when Trump is the system in the worst aspects. You know what I mean? So, you know, that was an achievement of the party, that it actually brought in brothers and sisters from that group. And your point, I think, needs to be stressed. That was the first level of recruits into the Black Panther Party.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
It's interesting that cats coming from that level would be attracted to the party, because most of them wouldn't be attracted to anything political.
Yeah, and how that was done too is when they were doing the patrols, they get arrested, they articulate to them, all you have to do is give your name, your address if you choose, your phone number, or take the fifth, and say nothing when they arrest you. Or if you get and what's your name, rather stuff, and we'll come bail you out. And they did that on many occasions. Yeah. And then now doing it in the community, on the streets, you have people gathering around, they saying this. This act, you know,
Yes, it's bringing out the manhood and womanhood, saying that these people are standing up.
And that's when you connect that to when Huey on 7th Street, where we was holding the Free Huey organizing committees. Down on 7th Street is where we used to go and be organized. That was in the hood then. That's where they had all the clubs and all of the lumping in the community. Would party and hang out. That's why I was out there. You know, that's where Huey was. Right down there where the post office is now. On 7th Street was that where 7th and Willow was where when he got wounded and the cop got killed. Yeah. So it was in the hood there. Yeah.
And Huey was engaged in some lumping activity himself.
Yeah.
As he said, burglarizing some houses in the Oakland, in the Berkeley Hills and stuff like that. And always had this attraction. He said in his family, there were 2 attractions in his family. One family member who was a hustler, and the other who was his older brother, Melvin Newton. One pulling him in the direction of education, the other one pulling him in the other direction. So Huey had that kind of thing. And then even with the discussion of his meeting with Malcolm when he spoke at the Mind of the Ghetto conference sponsored by the Afro-American Association, that he was impressed by the fact that Malcolm was an ex-con, but an ex-con who had learned to use his mind, you know what I mean? And could command knowledge better than most professors could. So again, you got these 2, but in this case, it's the political that's having the greater pull. So I'd say part of this lumping thing and Huey's appeal, or at least finding what Fanon is saying attractive, is to kind of match some stuff going on with him. You know, would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, what were some of the problems then that you developed? Because on one hand, you're getting some brothers ancestors off the street, who have a fighting spirit, but they also got some other attitudes that are coming from their illegal activity.
Yeah, and they bring that with them into the party,
right?
And you have to begin to set policies in place because you're seeing it, you're observing it, and you're saying, well, this is called problems, and we can't have this. You can't be drinking and getting drunk, smoking on doing party work, all those. So we had to put guidelines in. That was the first. Every time we seen things that were happening that would cause detrimental to the growth, we say, well, you got to do something about that. And then we come together, have those, it would be decided on what it was we're going to do. But that tape or maybe was sent to all the chapters and branches so they could understand how that policy was going to be implemented across the board. And that's the way we began to deal with it. And some of the things we had, like we said, no party members can have narcotics or weed in possession while doing party work. That was initially. And then it said, any party member found shooting narcotics or drugs will be expelled from this party. No party member will violate rules relating to office work, general meetings of Black Panther Party, and meetings of the Black Panther Party anywhere. No party member will use, point, or fire a weapon of any kind unnecessarily or accidentally at anyone. No party member can join any other army force other than the Black Liberation Army. No party member can have weapons in his possession while drunk or loaded off narcotics. Number 8, no party member will commit any crime against any other party member. You want me to go on? I can read them all if you like.
Yeah, go ahead and read them.
Okay. I'll get to the next page. Any part people at all and cannot steal or take from the people, not even a needle or a piece of thread.
That sounds like Mao Zedong right there.
Yeah. It was inspired. That was extracted from their policy. Yeah. Then when arrested, Black Panther members will give only name, address, and will not sign nothing. Legal first aid must be understood by all party members. The 10-point platform and program and platform of the Black Panther Party must be known and understood by each party member. Number 11, party communications must be national and local. Number 12, the 10-10-10 program should be known by all members and also understood by all members. Number 13, all finance officers will operate under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Finance. Number 14, each person will submit reports of daily work, Number 15, each subsection leader, section leader, and lieutenant captain must submit daily report of work. All Panthers will learn to operate service weapons correctly. Number 17, all leaders who expel a member must submit this information to the editor of the newspaper so that it will be published in the newspaper and will be known by all chapters and branches. That was negated later on doing that. And then number 8 is I got about to 26. I'm on 18.
Yeah, you don't need the rest of it.
Okay.
Okay, good. So basically what you're saying is, as people came in with discipline problems,
yes,
you were dealing with situations, and what you did is develop rules for handling those.
Yes.
How effective were those?
Well, it was very effective because they went along with political education classes. It had and you had to have a constructive evaluation in those classes, going back and forth, and it was made clear that no one could attack the other. Everyone had the right to say what they had on their mind, and the other one had to listen. And if they had to rebuttal or wanted to say something, they could, but it couldn't be nothing in the context of wanting to go to battle or those kinds of things. Yeah.
Criticism, self-criticism. People had
Yes.
to be open to look at themselves and look at each other and listen and then try and.
And now, we had in place, it doesn't necessarily mean that absolutely solved the problem.
Right.
But it did, in many ways, it did begin to transform those
right
attitudes. Yeah.
Right. Because Huey had made the comment that this was in the early phase, that the approach to the lumpen was to channel them constructively, I'm paraphrasing, their activities into political action. But at the same time, he was suggesting without completely cutting off their illegal activities. Now, that was at one point, meaning that they might continue to do some of that stuff, but in the party, they're not doing it. Is that correct?
That's absolutely, yes. Because we had no jobs for them. You didn't have no place for them to live and the whole that, at that time,
That was a lesson you could have learned from the San Francisco Freedom Movement. We provided jobs for thousands of people. That is a key. And in fact, that is a key thing that any movement that wants to build support among Black people, they better have that component, a job and an economic component. At that time, you didn't need the economic component so much because in Oakland, you had Black businesses and the Fillmore had Black businesses, but the jobs were scarce. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's key. And the key cure to a gangster is a good paying job. They won't take care of all of them, but most of them, their gangster stuff is gone. They might even get married. You know what I mean?
And a lot of them did transform. Yeah. A lot of folks did transform.
Yeah. Because the system is the gangster system. And then the system, the system puts other people flat on their backs. And now it's not just Blacks. That's why they're concerned, not the system, but whites are. Because now it's affected them. You know what I mean? Yeah. So this is key. Now, Eldridge Cleaver, it would seem to me, fit the classic definition of a lumpen. Classic. What were his strengths and weaknesses? And describe both his positive and negative contributions to the Black Panther Party. Because I'm doing this because he's not only a lumpen, he's probably the third most important leader in the Black Panther Party up to a certain point.
And that because he was a great orator, and when he met Huey met him, they were trying to encourage him to become the editor. When he did agree to become the editor of our paper, the Black Panther Community News Service, there were times when he was doing something that he wasn't supposed to do. But then Huey and Bobby was following the tenets to never talk about stuff in the public. And even when they would come over, they would put him into the bathroom and say, "We need to talk to you for a minute." And they come out saying, "Yeah, bro, you can't do that," and all those kinds of things. So that was the original official initial way they used to communicate with Eldridge. Even when you talked about the rally to raise funds when we went to Sacramento, when it was the Miriam Baraka, I believe yourself and others may have been to Fillmore Auditorium. And I got arrested that night because I was strapped with a gun and bringing posters in. Well, it was Eldridge who told me to strap up, and I'm working under him, so I assume because we're working on the paper, and we still got the skeleton group of people working together, hadn't been beginning to grow, and so I strapped on and I go there, and the police is right down the street. They see me with that gun. They think I'm bringing in a whole box of military equipment. And when they open it up, it ain't that but posters. And they so embarrassed that I get arrested. You see, and I get out the next day. But then Hugh and them asked me later on why was I carrying the gun, and I explained to them because Eldridge told me, he said, and then they went to him and explained to him he had no rights to do that. you know. So it was those kinds of things. He was over doing what sometimes things he wasn't assigned to have the authority to do. So in that context, they would try to correct him on those issues and what have you. I think that when you look at it, and to die for the people, because Huey talks about this, and so I can talk about it in that context, is that he talked about the pure militaristic perspective that he had in the context of, even though it did excite and a lot of folks emotionally, at rallies and what have you, and even when he even talked about in the context of the swearing, and which it did play an impact part in relationship to the defiance, in relationship to people looking at the system, and Ronald Reagan and Nixon at the time, because he had people saying F Ronald Reagan, nurses and nuns and what have you. But at the same time, Huey thought of it, some folks in the community just didn't like that. So what happened is that one had went to, I think with David Head or one of them went to see Huey and told him about how impactful it was and what he thought about it. And Huey sent a message back that was played at PE class. He said, "Well, Malcolm never cussed. He got over." So he had a whole vision and understanding that it may have been a thing at that moment and in a broad scope, but it still didn't have any substance to it in the context of serving the interests of the community, which we still talked about the quality of life issues, like employment, jobs, education, all those things. Yeah. So that was always the focus then. Always that was considered revolutionary in the context, achieving those issues.
Yeah. Huey talked about how his father was a minister, and his family would regularly go to church, and he never became extremely religious. But he said one of the things that really stuck with him was his use of language, and he refrained from cursing, even though he's drawn in this lumping activity. That was one thing he didn't do, and he was right. That would offend a lot of Black people. You know what I mean? Especially older Black people.
Yeah.
But I raised the question of Eldridge Cleaver because he's a classic lumpen. And what I'd say about the lumpen proletariat, first of all, the observation that Fanon made was incorrect. Fanon said that the lumpen would play the leading role in the African independence movement. You can't point one African independence movement where that was true. You couldn't. There were no lumpens leading the African independence movement. In fact, I think the closest to a lumpen would be Idi Amin. You know what I mean? And he really wasn't a lumpen, but he behaved like a gangster and ran his country. It kind of like he was the head of the Crips or something. You know what I mean? Terrorized his people and did everything else. So Fanon Fanon was brilliant. He was a psychiatrist. He wrote Wretched of the Earth. And one of the most important studies in a dying colonialism, where he's dealing with the psychiatric problems of Algerians engaged in a battle against the French. So he had good observations on that. But he wasn't leading a liberation movement, and that was an emotional statement. He didn't back it up with any facts. You know what I mean? So lumpen leading a liberation movement, that ain't the case. And so that's problem number one with that theory. And so if Huey had been reading Amilcar Cabral, he would have got a different, conclusion on that. So one of the reasons that I'm using Eldridge Cleaver is that I think there's also categories of lumping. And there are certain kinds of behavior that people engage in. It's going to make it very hard for them to make a positive contribution unless they make a very hard effort to change themselves. And in some cases, I would never trust the change. For example, this guy, Monster Cody, who came from a good family. And as a gangster, would actually take a saw and saw off a person's arm and stuff like that, and later becomes political in prison. But you wonder, what would it take to turn somebody like that really around? Because when you get that kind of taste of blood, engage in that kind of behavior, the question is, can you be brought back? And in the case of Eldridge, Eldridge was a rapist. And I have to say this, an unreformed rapist, and continued to be in the Black Panther Party. True?
Well, I guess, I don't know. In the Black Panther Party, maybe it was, yeah.
Yeah, well, in fact, I know he was, and it also showed up in his language. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you know, the key point is that means, and you know, the first show I made the comment that when I first met Eldridge, when he was trying to get me to support the Betty Shabazz rally, which I agreed to support, and I grilled him on what he had read, he hadn't read anything, you know. And what that told me was that in the time he was in prison, he wasn't working on himself internally. And that's what made the difference between a Malcolm X and him and a lot of other people who come out of prison. The nation worked their transformation on Malcolm because they had the spiritual thing, the religious thing. But the main transformation that Malcolm worked in prison was on himself through studying history, through studying politics, through studying economics, spirituality, and whatnot, but working it inside himself, where he made the comment that first my philosophy changed, then my attitude changed, then my thought pattern changed, then my communication pattern changed, and my behavior pattern changed. What he's referring to, change from hustling, you know, change from being a person you couldn't trust. And if you looked at the pictures of Malcolm when he first went into prison, you wouldn't trust him with your cat, let alone your dog. He had that, you know, that sniveling look, you know what I mean? But when he came out, you could see a transformed person, and his face, different stages. When he comes out, he's a straight up Muslim. He looks like a monk. And then later on, he's cooling out, but he's still got this internal discipline. So one of the things that I would say is this, that in addition to political education, which is important, there has to be spiritual transformation. There has to be historical study. You know, there has to be a deep immersion in your culture, the best parts of your culture. And at that time, I wouldn't fault the party for not knowing this, but at that time, some of us were going through this awakening process, and it's an organic process that doesn't just apply to lumpen, it applies to the middle class. Because if you got middle class blacks coming in who think they're better than the people, then what Huey called revolutionary suicide, what that really is dying as an elite that thinks they're better than the people and becoming servants of the people. So they have to undergo that kind of transformation. So that's called, now, you know, we've classified that the six-fold stages to mental freedom. This got stages to it. And if you can't take people through that, and the nation was pretty good at doing that up to a point. They were good at religious conversion, but they were not into the politics. Malcolm was into the spirituality, but most importantly, the politics. So, and even then, I think there are some lumpen you just can't recruit and have. You just can't, because they're just beyond the pale.
I would tell if you see, Hugh and Bobby was able to have elders focus on the newspaper because that's what they always talked about. They wanted him for, and that's what they were trying to achieve with him. So if they really want to get the perspective on from Huey, read the correct handling of the revolution, which as in the to die for the people. It's in that book. I think that's the one, correct handling of the revolution. I believe that's the one article where he talks about Eldridge in the context of critiquing and being to have a constructive criticism of Eldridge in the book. Yeah, but the real differences came in was when Eldridge went to Algeria, and we were here, and I had went to Algeria 2 or 3 times with Kathleen to connect with Eldridge, and then back and forth for the first Pan-African Culture Festival. Then I explained I wasn't coming back anymore. And so I didn't go back. But it was then then you got COINTELPRO.
Right.
It slides under him and telling
Right.
him different things that's going on. But he's also over there. You got brothers coming over and sisters who have no other options because they have to leave and what have you, who are there. And Huey gets a whiff of this because it's on the news that there's this difference of stuff going on. And he wants to have this meeting, so he calls elders to say how we have to set up a meeting on the main talk host show so they can resolve that. And the elders had agreed to that. And so it was called the Jim Dunbar Show. It was well known. And then what happened is that Huey gets on the show, and he thinks he and elders are going to talk about mending the differences, and elders attacks him. And after he attacks him, it was after then he was suspended from the party. That's when he became antagonistic. So COINTELPRO did what it was supposed to do, and right. But Huey also said that he understood those comrades who were over there who may agree or disagree, took that position that he took, or what have you, that they had no options because there was no place else they could go to at that time. Mm-hmm. And that he understood it in the context that Kathleen was his wife at the time. So he would have nothing against her. It was just about elders. And how it could have been resolved is if elders would have called him back and said, man, I've been getting all this whiff about us and all the stuff you talk about. And then that could have resolved it. Yeah. But he didn't do that, But so that goes to the point of what the Peace Stone Rangers, when we organized.
We'll come to that in a minute.
Okay.
But your point there is that COINTELPRO, that we're going to go into in a minute, could work most effectively through your weaknesses. And so whatever your weaknesses are, they're going to run through you like a Mack truck, what I mean? And Eldridge had some prominent ones. Huey also, at that point, had some of his own. And so those weaknesses enabled those things to work, And it wasn't just Huey and Eldridge, a lot of other forces in the Black Liberation Movement that got played because of ego, because of gangbanging mentalities, because of a whole lot of things. And as a result of that, stuff that shouldn't have happened could happen, So that's real key. Now, Huey and Bobby both had interactions with RAM, Revolutionary Action Movement, which was a nationalist Marxist organization. And its leader, Muhammad Ahmed, had relationships with Malcolm X before Malcolm's assassination. And Bobby had been in RAM, and Huey interacted with people in RAM, Revolutionary Action Movement. And then out of this forms a group called the Black Panther Party from Northern California. And so one of the things they provided at a certain point, because I think I'm going to give them this much credit, they did have some strong intellectuals in there. They were very small in number. In the Bay Area is a guy named Kenny Freeman at that point, and Vincent Lynch and a few others. Very small group, but very well read, well read. And they had their issues. Kenny Freeman, later he was called Mamadou Lumumba, had an ego that was huge, a little guy, but he had a huge ego. So any kind of working with other groups, and I'm not saying that the Black Panther Party for self-defense didn't bring any egos in either, but I'm saying you got that, you got a problem, because generally if you're going to work in these movements, you got to bury your ego. So that was a problem. But the strength of the Black Panther Party for Northern California is that, they had a little publication called Soul Book. It was printed on a mimeograph machine. and it had a lot of analysis of the movement. And they were using Marxist techniques of boring within groups trying to influence them. He did that with SNCC in the South, and they were doing that with us and others. But they had some interesting analysis and some good analysis. And one of theirs was a warning to Huey and Bobby. And it was based on their study of the armed self-defense movements in Brazil. And what they argued was, and they also supported self-defense, though the Panthers would have some issues with them on how they carried it out. You can talk about that in a minute. They warned the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense that their study of the armed self-defense movements in Brazil demonstrated that when a political organization centered itself on armed self-defense, the state would surround them and wipe them out. And this was in the very early stages of the party. They made this warning. What was the Black Panther Party's general view on this critique? And, well, start with that.
Yeah. Well, that's also in To Die for the People, where he referenced that, and he talked about in the context that what you just said, but he also explained that the party understanding and position is that if you go underground and you're not serving the community, the people of the community, is they're gonna know who is you when you need to go underground.
Right.
So if you serve in the community and you see some results of what you're doing, then if you need to go underground, you'll have that support. See, but at the same time, if you threatening them and what have you, they look at you as a terrorist, all kinds of stuff, because they don't know who you are. You know. So and you can be defined as such, and they wouldn't know who you are. You know. And so that was the party position, is that, you know, in regards to being revolutionary here again. That's why the programs were considered revolutionary, serving the interests of the people. If you want the people, the community to serve you. That was why he said at one point when I mentioned back to we was spouting a lot of revolutionary rhetoric and talking about and had got caught up in everybody got caught up in the Eldridge syndrome of the purely militaristic perspective. When Huey got out and what have you, said, well, it's time to put down the guns, because it's not between us and the police. And that's what it comes to, because the people are standing on the sideline saying right on while the Panthers are being killed.
Yeah, exactly.
So that we weren't achieving what we was talking about achieving. So they put on and get out there and begin to implement this program, the 10-point platform, what we want and what we believe, you know. Yeah, and so that's how they view that statement. Who the people gonna know who you are? If you don't know who you are from Jump Street, and then you have to go underground. If you're underground, they don't know you anyway.
Now Huey was making that critique because RAM, which was walking around in broad daylight, calling themselves underground, and I know when they were in the South. They went to the South, Mississippi. I talked to Askia Muhammad Toure, who was one of the leading members and a great poet in the Black Arts movement. He was a part of a small group. Muhammad Ahmed was another that went to Mississippi to counsel Black people on the need to arm themselves. And then, to their surprise, they found out Blacks are already armed. Well, guess what? Just because you got this picture of a peaceful Black freedom movement, that did not mean that the people who are engaged in demonstrations ain't armed at home or armed in their car or whatever. And so then Muhammad Ahmed had to be smuggled out of Mississippi because the rumor was that they were coming after him. You know what I mean? Now, the major leaders in Mississippi stayed. They didn't have to be smuggled out. So Huey's response to the underground was in part a response to people giving him that advice who were claiming to be underground, but everybody knew where they were.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that also paralyzed you from doing the kind of political work you should have been doing in the community on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
But you made a comment when we were talking a couple of days ago that there was an early point where Eldridge and Bobby had discussed the issue early on of eliminating self-defense from the name of Black Panther Party, and it was referred to Huey. What happened?
Yeah, well, when working on the paper, it was about I think a couple of months before Huey got shot and police got killed. And Eldridge and Bobby were talking. Huey was still over in Oakland, coming to San Francisco later on that day. And they had just talked about it, had agreed that based on how the party was moving and doing other social programs and everything that was happening with the politics and with the party, that came to the conclusion that it should change the name, shorten the name to the Black Panther Party, because it was much more than the Black Panther Party for self-defense that was coming, and that they seen that as the part where we're heading. And so when Huey came over, they was talking to Huey, and they told Huey and showed him the masthead. And Huey said, no, he was reluctant, he did not want to do that. And because the fact he said it's still in infant stages of the Black Panther Party. And we still got these issues around point number 7, immediately into murder of Black people, and what have you. And so we still need to stay focused on that at the point. And at the same time, developing programs, but that we should not change the name at that point. Because it was during that time with self-defense when Ruth Bedford came by to set up the first breakfast program, which was set up after Huey got murdered, was at her church in early 1968. After Huey got shot, the police got murdered. So I don't think it was opposed to it. It was just a matter of when and timing. Yeah. Because it only was you're talking about 6-7 months into the organization itself.
About how long before the party dropped the self-defense from the name of the party?
Okay, that was it was when Huey was locked up at Alameda County. Free Huey movement had been in full motion, and they had reporters, and they had a group of reporters that they let come down. And had this guy from the UK who was working with KPFA, and there was other all kinds of reporters. Eldridge was there, and I think Eldridge had put the word out himself. And so when one of the reporters said, "What did you think about the name being changed?" It's in one of those documentaries that you see on interviews on YouTube. And Huey just briefly said, "Yeah, well, he supported, and it was fine, and the whole bit." And that was it. But the way he responded was in the sense that, what can he say? I'm locked up. What can I do about it?
So about what year was that?
This had to be early 1968, because that's when the paper came out not December paper, October, December was in January when the title began to first change to short. So it had to be a little after early 1968.
Had the FBI really come down heavy on the party at that point?
Well, it was 68, 69 when 68, when you got that document to show that FBI never talked about crushing the Black Panther Party, because they're making alliances with the Black nationalist movements, and they're coming together, all of them joining together. So you got that. But the early days, one of the first ones was when the Berkeley police, Bobby said it was one of the police who had compassion or something, left the tape with us and opened the tape, and it talked about this raid that they had when we had an office on Shattuck, how they were going to surround the office. They're going to have a dead wagon to come in to evacuate the dead. how they were going to shoot tear gas in and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to reporters, exposed to the reporters the next day, and then they went and talked to the Berkeley Police Department. They said, yeah, that was the plan, but that wasn't the whole plan, you see, at that time. So that was early 1967. And I think we carried that whole document on the front of our paper back then. Yeah. So he had that, yeah.
So, I think it's important to point out. So this critique was that if you took the stand of armed self-defense in a political context, the state would surround you and do you in. Yet, there's a group like the Deacons for Self-Defense coming out of South Carolina, coming out of Louisiana, who the state didn't surround and wipe out. And it was a very serious self-defense group that the FBI couldn't penetrate, But in the case of Robert Williams, his advocacy of self-defense in North Carolina, the state ran him out, the country. So I don't think it was just a question of whether you had a name self-defense on your organization. It was also a question of how the state perceived you and how you were moving and what the state wanted to do with you. Because when you all get designated as the #1 national security problem, you didn't have no more than 6,000 members. How in the holy hell is a 6,000 member organization with no more than shotguns, pea shooters, compared to what the police and the Army and the National Guard and the Marine Corps have? How are you going to be a threat to national security? And you were just defending yourself. You weren't talking about using this to overthrow the state.
I think what it was is that it was. I think it was more in the context that we were beginning to change mindsets. We were beginning to change people's mindsets. Even though they weren't becoming Black Panthers, they were beginning to do and demand some of those social programs and things and stuff. So that was the issue, pointing out the contradictions of what the government should have been doing to help with the social programs to help people in need, and they wasn't doing it. And that was an embarrassment to them. At the same time, you got the Jesse Unruh, the treasurer of the state of California, saying that the Black Panther Party feeds more hungry children in the United States government, and they blast that on the news all day long, And we constantly showing up, and you see these people demanding to have the breakfast program. Now they're also demanding for the free lunch programs in the schools. So you point and you're in defiance of all forms of human rights violations, and they can't deal with that. They couldn't deal with that. Then you had others who may have been inspired by us, but had their own perspective and views on it. Because you have AIM, the American Indian Movement, who acknowledged that they were inspired by the Black Panthers. That's how they started, and up there in Minnesota, Then you were making the Young Lords out of Puerto Rican group, out of Chicago and out of New York. You got these young patriots, these racists who didn't have any commonality with the Panthers until they started working them on the West Side, and they became our allies as well. Then we used to go shoot pool in Chinatown with the Red Guard, which was the Chinese gang. You see, and DC used to go over there. He did some PE classes with them, reading the Red Book and stuff, and talking about doing stuff. And then they shifted. You had another group called the Iwakun, which is a group out of New York, So you got those dynamics. Then you got the Brown Berets, and they all used to be at the rallies and stuff.
Those were Latinos.
Yes. So all those dynamics is that they see as a threat to the internal security of the United States.
Well put, because the whole name of the game is divide and conquer. They don't want to see any cross group unity, and then don't begin to infect their own people, which you're also doing. And so, this would be threat number one.
And during that time, we went when you had white draft resistance who went to Scandinavia. Everett Big Ben Howard and Bobby went over there for 3 or 4 months and stayed, and they were selling papers. And we used to show that in the paper. Yeah. Then we go to North Vietnam in Defiance. Then we go to North Korea. I mean, go South Vietnam. We go to South Korea, you know, and all these different places. Yeah, then we had alliances when things were working straight over in Algeria. We used to meet with the liberation movements and all those. Yeah. Then they give us liberation status as the liberation movement. And you know what? So all these dynamics, whether how smooth it was from our perspective, but the government seen it as a great threat, you know. Yeah.
And internationally, you had a number of groups forming internationally as Black Panther Party chapters. Where's some of the places in the world where that happened?
Yeah, you had Australia, in Brisbane, Australia. I met with some of those brothers when I used to go back and forth. In Australia, primarily in Brisbane, Australia during that time. Then you had it in London. You had the London Panthers. And then you had the Panthers in, matter of fact, you had in Palestine, you had Panthers. But then when you went to Palestine with a delegation, because you had the inside of Israel, there was Palestinians, there was Moroccans more so than anything at that time, and they wouldn't let them into Israel. I mean, at that time. So y'all had those who were inspired the dialect Panthers, the lowest caste in India, were inspired, and they call themselves the dialect Panthers. But then you had the Polynesian Panthers in New Zealand, which became an official chapter in 1971.
Now this makes a point that I've been making since this show started, and I don't know how many people really get it. African American culture is the popular culture of the United States and the world. And when we think of culture, too often we're thinking of the music. That's not the culture, that's the art form. That's the highest realm of the culture if it's on a high realm, because ain't all music high realm, you know what I mean? But if it's on a high realm. But that culture is on every level. And on the political level, that's serious. Angela Davis, as I pointed out before, in Brazil, pack a stadium. You know what I mean? And so the Black Panther Party is an example of the power of the political culture of African American culture. And it's global. Whereas with America, their political culture is at the barrel of a gun. It's at war. You know what I mean? Or it's the CIA coming in and overthrowing somebody, or it's puppets coming up and telling stories. But they actually have to either invade a country or throw money around, or, you know, have puppets behaving in their own behalf, where all we have to do is put out an idea, stand for it. You know what I mean? And the world stands up behind it, or sing a song, or do some poetry, or whatever, if it's rap or whatever. Our culture is a global culture in the world, and the Panthers are an example of it. And the examples being given here are real profound. You hear me? Real profound. In other words, all over the world, oppressed people, especially people of color, were being inspired by this and stood up behind it. That's no small measure. Now, in terms of the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, at a certain point around 68, the FBI begins to put over 80% of its attention in terms of knocking groups off under the COINTELPRO counterintelligence program label on the Black Panther Party. Describe to people what the aims and objectives of the Black Panther Party was, of the counterintelligence program was. What specific things were they attempting to do, and how did they carry it out against the Black Panther Party?
Well, there was what you had them sending poison pen letters on Panther Nation stationery to people who were making contributions to our programs, which I talked about one time in the past, is where this brother came in that Bobby knew him well, and he had this letter on Panther stationery, and there was a letter threatening him for more. He wasn't donating enough. And he's shaking, and he's saying, "Bobby, I'm doing all I can." And Bobby's saying, "Brother, that's not us. That's the police." So it is a psychological impact of that. They would go there. They start dressing up gangsters like Panthers, and they were going into the stores that were vendors who were donating food and other things to our breakfast and food programs and what have you. And they would threaten and intimidate that they had to give more, those kind of things, or it's something was going to happen. They think this is the psychological warfare that was taking place in the context of the Panthers itself. Yeah, you see, you had all those. They had this guy who, his name was Swearinger. He was an FBI agent, and he acknowledged that they had a group within the FBI called Racial Matters, that if you had to hate, just like blacks, to be a part of that unit. He acknowledged that they're the ones who were setting up all this criminal murderous activity that was taking place. He kind of referred to that in, I think, Stanley Nelson's movie, Vanguard of the Revolution. So
yeah,
he had,
because overall the COINTEL program was designed to prevent the rise of charismatic black leaders, and then they listed a number of them. Malcolm had been one, King had been one, and others, to prevent any organizations like the Black Panther Party, a number of other groups from rising and doing their best to break them up, to imprison, assassinate, or force into exile people who are involved in the Black liberation movement, and to discredit them to all sectors of the community. Your own community, if you're black or brown, whatever group you're coming out of, discredit you there. And the example that you're given, media manipulation, they would go in there and sometimes they would have a reporter that worked for the FBI, and the newspaper didn't even know who they were. And they'd be planning stories and stuff like that. So, but the main thing was, this was a deadly campaign. This was not tiddlywinks. This was serious business. They were out to shut you down. Bloody,
and then it goes again, how you heighten the contradiction and educating people. It was the illegitimate capitalists, gangbangers in Chicago, Eastern Rangers. We had that close relation. Only one can go into their territory and set up free breakfast room or health clinics, those kinds of things. Then they started doing some of the same thing. Then Jeff Ford, and they would communicate with them. And there was a group. It wasn't the Peace Stone, it was another group, the Disciples, I think it was. I remember going to Chicago. They took me by the office. They were strong gangsters. Had pictures of Huey and in the office and stuff. So they was coming around and what have you. So they started sending pen letters to them and saying that we were out to kill them and a whole bit. And so we got a whiff of that. And Huey Jeff Ford was able to come out and communicate with Jeff Ford that about that whole situation. Yeah. So that kind of, they put it in context so they understood what was going on at that time, But, because even though you got these lumpings, they wanted to make some change, and it would have been a long process, right? But they were in that spirit of wanting to do that. And so,
Yeah, and Fred Hampton was very effective doing that organizing. You want to talk a little bit about Fred Hampton and his role in that?
Yeah. Well, Fred Hampton was the leader of the Illinois chapter, him and Bobby Rush. Bobby Rush became a congressman later on, where the Bobby Rush Fred Hampton was a deputy chairman, and Bobby Rush was the deputy minister of defense of the Illinois chapter. And Fred was a young man who had been a part of the NAACP, I believe, when he was 13, 14, 15 years old, was inspired and got involved with the Panthers at the same time. Around Bobby Rush and him connected together, and they came out at different times, and that was when the party began to take off in Chicago. He was a very charismatic speaker. He was very principled in how he carried and what he did, And so he was targeted, and when by agents, young man who stole a car, took it across straight lines, and that was a federal offense. And they pressured him until I don't know if they pressured him or not, but they pressured him to the point of where he took the deal to infiltrate the Black Panther Party and worked his way up into security. He was the ones who gave him all the layouts and plans of the apartment and what have you. Yeah.
And he got paid $300
Yeah.
for the murder of Fred Hampton, the other killed there. Yeah. And the FBI also saw that had that alliance been carried out between the Blackstone Rangers that became the Blackstone P Nation, indicating the name change that they were becoming politicized, it would have doubled the membership of the Black Panther Party, you know? So that was some successful organizing. And then Fred Hampton had just come back from Oakland, and he was going to be appointed to a high office in the Black Panther Party right before he was murdered. You know? So, and then afterwards, what happens after Fred Hampton is murdered, later the Blackstone P Nation is funded. They get funding, government funding. And what happens is it surfaces them, it identifies them, and then there's systematic killing coming from state operatives of Blackstone P Nation members. I had the FBI files on that, you know. And then, as you're pointing out, there's an example of the lumpen being turned around. They were supportive of King's Poor People's Campaign, and they were part of it after King's assassination by the same government, through the same methods, the counterintelligence program. So the party endured some heavy hits, and one of the people that did was Assata Shakur. Could you describe some of her contributions to the party?
Yeah. I first remember meeting Assata when she came out when we had an office in West Oakland, and I seen this pretty lady walk by the office, and she didn't come in that day. And I remember coming back the next day, she had came in and she introduced her, and she had been out there for I think a conference. It had been one of the student conferences or something, I believe. And it was there after that she became involved in New York in the Harlem chapter of the Black Panther Party. And Assata was arrested, shot on the turnpike in New Jersey with her hands up because she was in the car with other comrades, and she was shot, sent to a men's prison, I believe at the time. And she was liberated out of the prison. And one of those people don't talk about, don't know, was a white woman named Marilyn Bach. And she believed she was a John Brown, first kind.
She was involved in her liberation.
In her liberation.
Weather Underground and the Black Liberation Army, those two pulled that off, and that was maximum security prison, wasn't it?
I believe so. Yes, I don't know detail yet, but I think so.
Yeah, I mean, it was not an easy thing to pull off, and there's a little story in this. This is our spirituality. Assanta's in prison, and her grandmother comes to visit her, and the grandmother didn't know that a plan was underfoot to free Assata. She had a dream, and she told her daughter she had a dream where people were going to bust her out of prison.
And the film, it's in the film by Gloria Rolando, the Black Cuban filmmaker. She did a major film, but you can see it online on YouTube.
Okay.
What's the name? I can't think the name of it, but I can give it to you, send it to you for sure.
Yeah. That's important.
But I think it might be called Assata, but if you look up the film by Gloria Rolando and Assata, it should come up.
Okay. Yeah, she's a woman of integrity and has been in Cuba for a long time, and the Cubans have not given her up. The Americans want her sent back, and I think they're willing to give $1 million for her. And she was shot in the back, and they're going to accuse her of killing a cop. You know what I mean? This is pure frame-ups. So just wrapping this up, What do you think are some lessons we can learn in terms of COINTELPRO and in terms of how we can more effectively handle that? And I should point out, there are methods more sophisticated being used now. I'm not going to go into them that we need to be more appraised of. We generally know are the ones they've used before. So what are some of the things that you think we can do to better handle these kind of attacks?
You have to, then people were kind of reluctant to say something because a lot of times it may have been thought of as you trying to make yourself look like something was going on. It's trying to set something up, this kind of thing. So I think there has to be discussion out front in the context of how to resolve and deal with those issues so people can be informed and enlightened. And I think that should be according to the organization itself and how best to do that, more so than saying, well, you can do this, 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 and this. It's something I think has to be based on conditions and situations, but definitely not getting on no electronic anything to do it. Yeah.
Right. Another thing I think is you need to set up security sections in your own organization. We think of security sections as the guys or women who are standing with their arms folded or might have a weapon. That's not what a security section is. That may be a part of it. That may be the guard section that guards somebody, but that isn't real security. These are people trained in how to spot agents. These are people who are trained in the different types of agents that are going to come into a group. These are people who are trained in spotting a line, because generally when they're sending somebody into your group, they're going to have been prepared. And they're going to come in with a cover story. They're going to have a certain line, all the rest of this stuff. And you got to have people who are checking people out, you know what I mean? And going to their homes, checking out their stuff. So I've had experience in this. I mean, really, there's been 3 assassination attempts on me, 3 to kill me, 2 to take my job, 1 of which I let them take. And then the other they tried to take, you know what I mean? At San Francisco State. And that was a part of the COINTELPRO program where you deny people an opportunity to teach younger people. That was a key part of COINTELPRO. The one I let them keep was when in Marin, I was teaching junior high school, Marin, Marin, and it was ex-Panther, Sid Walton, who was the head of that school, and the superintendent was going to give me a provisional teaching credential. The FBI filed a 17-page report saying I was a criminal, should be denied it. And I pointed out before, I could have beat that. And I'm going to Sacramento to hire the lawyer. And my spirit said no. I always listen to the spirit. I turned around. 3 years later, I'm at state. Now they're trying to deny me there. I'm saying, I'm fighting this baby. And we beat them. But the point is, 1 is, you got to have security section. 2, you got to have a way of orienting people who will come into a group. Like the Panthers had political orientation. That's part of it. But you got to really orient people around the 6-fold stages to mental freedom, because what happens is sometimes you'll turn around agents. But the key point is you'll create the kind of discipline within your people that it's less likely that they are going to be able to be used, because there's certain types of agents provocateurs, for example, they play on your weaknesses. We all got weaknesses, so work on them. So there's a lot of stuff that we can do, but we have to be trained in this. But there's a thing now called low intensity operations, much more sophisticated. They ran that on my group, Pan African People's Organization. I had trained in it. Had I not, I pointed this out before, had I not been in the United Kingdom and studied the author of this, and then studied how Reagan adapted it in California and brought it to the White House and put it under FEMA, and that makes COINTELPRO look like a picnic, because it's basically brutal. And the methods they're using, a lot of them, if you just do your homework, you can check a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
except when they come to kill you, then you have to have some definite stuff to handle that. But low intensity operations, a whole nother story, because this was developed to improve upon the suppression methods of COINTELPRO, and there are others. You have to train in this, and you got to have people who are disciplined to handle this. And
Yeah.
even then, you can be penetrated.
And then there's things that they do to try to lure you into it. I'll just give you one example, is that when Huey came back and was going to court, we had a skeleton crew at the office when we were on East 14th doing a training operation. And I went to get some paper. There was these brothers who we knew who one of them had a restaurant up in the middle of the block where we used to frequent the restaurant and what have you, and they knew their daughters and stuff, was standing in front of the building. And so when I came back, they were still there, but then they was in auction building for sale. And I said, this building ain't for sale. And I go back out. I said, this building ain't for sale. And they got hostile. Yes, it is. And I, since what was going on, I went back in. I closed the door. I left those comrades there because we was on a skeleton crew, about 3 comrades, what was going on. We had an upstairs and a downstairs. And it's right on the corner, had windows up on the main street and on the side street. When I went up and I looked down on the side street, I seen the green car come up, which was then the Oakland detectives. I seen one of the guys go around and was talking to the driver. And I could looking down, he hands him a gun out the car. At that time, I let the comrades know, and I was going down to the courthouse to let the comrades know what was taking place. When I got down there and was explaining what took place, because of recess that came up, that same guy was coming out the back with the detectives. And I said, that's him. And the comrade said, she knew him because she's working with social people with these mental attitudes in Berkeley. And he was in that program. So that means, he was using all kinds of mixed people. But for him to get there, when I get there, they seen me when I left, Yeah. So you had all, and we come to find out that those guys up there were lumping. They was in a legitimate activity, because as a brother who also knew them found out that they was in the illegitimate activity and got caught and was making deals with the FBI. So you got those kind of dynamics that you that come up. That's the part of the trying to create situations and conditions and all that, pit one against the other. The psychological impact of it that you have. Some people just can't deal with it. Some people just have to leave.
And leaders have to bury their ego, because a lot of problems are caused by leaders who themselves have got their own insecurities, and then they're being edged on, and people are going to suffer, and they're going to get up and take postures and stuff like that. And that takes courage. And another thing is, in a group, you got to be careful about labeling anybody as an agent, because the people who are most likely to be an agent are the ones you're going to least likely expect to be an agent, especially any that are any good. Now, a lot of the raggedy behavior we have in a group, that ain't agent behavior. That's just confused behavior. Right? And we got to be careful about putting labels. We should avoid that, labeling people and stuff like that. Because even if they are, that ain't the best way to handle them. Or if it is, then that's a method you're using to get them to leave as opposed to doing something else. But it's just a lot of discipline that has to go down. And one of the things is, I think one of the best things to lessen the weight of attacks from the state is to position yourself as best you can from the beginning of an organizing campaign around strategy, and put yourself in the best position you possibly can. And in military conflicts, it's the high ground, literally. in political campaigns, you know, organizing liberation movements, it's the high ground politically, morally, spiritually. Put yourself in those spaces because they may still come down on you. It's going to be harder for them to do it. So a lot of it is positioning. Leaders have to have this mentality. They don't want their members hurt. That's got to be their mentality. If it happens, it's going to happen. But it shouldn't be due to misleadership, to BS. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. Because too much of the stuff, many times, you know, they could play groups off against each other because of the weaknesses of the leaders themselves, you know. So, but there's no one answer to this. And if you get into the kitchen, you better be able to hand the grease. There's going to be grease. And the grease be red. It ain't, it ain't the grease of the kitchen. That ain't pretty. And the last thing is, we don't want martyrs. If we get them, fine. We don't want them. We want to avoid martyrdom because revolutionaries want to stay alive as long as possible, contribute to our people. Anything you want to say in wrapping this up, Emery?
Well, you know, it's got to be guided by love. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the key. That is the real key. The love of the people, the love of the truth, the love of the struggle. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I want to say again, Emery's too humble to say it himself. He's an example of that. A brother who embodies love, who's been through a whole lot. His head is right up there. You know what I mean? He's standing tall and he's continued to contribute for our people. You know what I mean? Including his creativity artistically, which is itself high political expression. And we're going to have him on at another point where he's going to just do a thing on his work, his beautiful work. So that's why I wanted you on, Emery. You're one beautiful brother. You've made beautiful contributions, and there are many like you in the party and other movements among our people. And we say all praise to you, brother. We're proud of you. You know what I mean? And all I see here is comments. I don't see any questions. I'm going to give people a second because you got all of this stuff here coming from Brother Emery Douglas, and you ain't got a single question. Shame on you. Any questions out here? You know what I mean? Anything that wasn't clear in the discussion or anything that you would like to ask Brother Emery? Anybody? You know? I'm going to give a few seconds, and if there aren't any, we're going to shut this down. But let me just note a few comments. Brother John Jackson, I remember one summer in 67 or 68 being assigned to the Black Panther Party office on East 14th Street for a summer job with Neighborhood Youth Corps. We would be there for 4 hours or so, leave, get paid for the whole day. Oh, really? Okay. Well, at least you were there. Heru Ka Anu, learning to better fight your enemies. That's a comment. Let's see if there's anything else here. Joe Jackson, this was excellent. Brother Eternal Lord Allah, peace to the righteous-minded family. Cynthia Cornelius, thank you, Dr. Shaka and Comrade Emery Douglas. I have enjoyed this enlightenment. Susan Tata, Pan-African DTV, congratulations. Pan-African DTV is watching. Brother Ugawa, greetings to all. LaShonda Henderson, it's a good point about building support. Let's see if there's any other comments here. Sister Robin, who's one of our most faithful viewers and most conscious ones, making a thank you. BB Gina, this was quite informative. Asante Sana, for sharing what can we do to reproduce the success of the BP. She's asking, what can we do to reproduce the success of the Black Panther Party?
Well, you can be inspired by it and be inspired by it, but you have to go out there and do it. You have to put it into practice and put from the theoretical perspective and the philosophical perspective, and critique it as you evolve, learn from your mistakes, and take in informative, enlightened information back, like Brother Baba Oba Tshaka has mentioned this today. And I think that would across the board from relevant information. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. To be inspirited, to be inspired by it, but not to try to duplicate, because you can't duplicate what's been done, but you can learn from it.
You can't duplicate it. These are different circumstances. Some are the same, but a lot of them are different.
Yes.
With John Jackson, with that summer memory in mind, what do you think of the party's methods for reaching the youth back then?
Well, because it was a youth movement that was inspiring to youth who wanted to join. It was young people who were frustrated with the issue, what was going on. Same as you have today, but you just don't have that any you don't have the kind of movements that you had at different time, what have you. But this was a youth movement, yeah.
On all levels, Black Panther Party, Black Freedom Movement, Pan-African Movement, all these movements were basically young, because that's the nature of liberation movements across the world, not just with Black people. You know what I mean? Heru Ka Anu, are you hosting ongoing talks on better organizing, lessons from the BP? Are you doing any kind of organizing training yourself?
No, I just do. Actually, I just do a lot of talk around the context of the artwork itself, and that may come out in when I'm talking about it in that response. So I just usually do a lot of PowerPoint presentations and talk about it in the context of the past and the more recent work and those kinds of things relating to the issues that it come out of.
Well, this show, one of the purposes of it is leadership training, and I set up an institute called the House of the Purank House of Life Amilcar Cabral Ella Baker Leadership Organizer Institute. Purank is the highest university system in ancient Kemet, the highest educational system in the world. And I'm finishing a book now on teaching methods that basically uses the methods that come out of Africa, that George Washington Carver used in his science, and many of our people use, where to know something, you got to be it. It's not just repeating it, you got to be it. Know the truth, you got to be the truth. So Purank is going to be doing leadership training. We've been laying the foundation for that with these shows. This right here, this is an in-depth survey of the Black Panther Party, in-depth look at Brother Malcolm X, in-depth look at the assassination that was carried out on him, in-depth look at King and, his orientation, in-depth look at ancient African history, African-American history, Black family system, our culture. So that's what this platform is about, and people who watch it should subscribe. Over half the people that watch this show end up watching it. We have not received in nearly 2 years one negative comment. So it's not that anyone dislikes the show, but push the subscriber button. You hear me?
Right.
That's one thing you can do to organize, and get your friends to do it. And I admit, when I came on this show, I didn't come in with the technical skills. I have one person that's helped me. Now we have a couple who are helping, and I'm getting more people in who are technically trained, because these algorithms are not set up for consciousness. So for you to beat the algorithms, you got to have people with good technology that know how it's a strategy, and stay in there and give people quality stuff. So we've been giving you quality stuff. So subscribe. And while we don't have the banner on today, make your donation. Some people have. I'm not taking corporate donations. I'm not going to do ads. That's another reason your show grows slower if you're not taking their money. I'm not going to make this uglified by talking about something revolutionary and advertising some toothpaste or prostitute in some other kind of way. And I put $24,000 of my money into this show the first year and a half. I can't keep doing that. So put some money where your mouth is. It don't have to be much. It's not going into my pocket. I need to hire a technician that will be able to recruit subscribers. That's a special skill. All my people right now are volunteering except for one that I'm still paying. So I need some help. And I appreciate the people who have. Make a donation. Hiru Ka Anu, thank you both, Brother Emery. I continue to remember one of the best eating experiences I had when visiting California with you, guiding me and Paul Coates on the best places to eat. Okay. That's important. You got to eat at the right time.
Yeah.
And Paul Coates, a good brother. He's an ex-Panther.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Baltimore chapter. He runs a publication called Black Classic Press.
Exactly.
Yeah, Ta-Nehisi is his son. He's well known.
Yeah. And he beautiful brother,
Yeah.
Okay, that looks like it's it. Thank you, brother. This has been enlightening for me.
All right.
I learned a lot.
Oh, okay.
A whole lot. Right on. Love you, brother.
Likewise, love you. Much love you, brother.
Yeah, right on. Okay. Hotep to everybody.
Okay.
Okay. Right on.